dreams, quiet walks by quiet streams, and a window looking on the mountains and the sea. How lovely, this is where I want to be, here with you so close to me, until the final flicker of life's ember.
Shift gears from Saturday party time, Jen, and a rainy day read to next to the fireplace, Jen.
A bitter tragic joke have found with you. The meaning of existence, oh my love. Mieux vaut ne penser rien que ne pas penser du tout. Rien c'est déjà beaucoup. On se souvient de rien et puisqu'on oublie tout. Rien c'est bien mieux que tout. Mieux vaut ne penser à rien que de penser à vous. Ça ne me vaut rien du tout. Comme si de rien n'était, je pense à tout. Ces petits riens qui me venaient de vous. Si c'était trop rien entre nous. Évidemment, ça n'était pas pour nous. Ce sont ces petits riens que j'ai mis bout à bout. Ces petits riens qui me venaient de vous. Mieux vaut pleurer de rien que de rire de tout. Pleurer pour rien, c'est déjà beaucoup. Mais vous n'avez rien dans le cœur et j'avoue, je vous envie, je vous en veux beaucoup. Ce sont ces petits riens qui me venaient de vous. Les voulez-vous, tenez, que voulez-vous? Moi, je ne veux pour rien au monde, plus rien de vous. Pour être à vous, faut être à moitié fou. Ce sont ces petits riens qui me venaient de vous. Les voulez-vous, tenez, que voulez-vous? Moi, je ne veux pour rien, plus rien de vous. Pour être à vous, faut être à moitié fou.
Well, hello there to all 6 of you. Welcome to the stream. Trying to figure out how to shift gears here between my Saturday night party time gin and rainy day reading to you next to the fireplace gin. So if I get a little too heated or amped up about something, just tell me to knock it off. But yeah, so I have a special, I'm not reading you the entire book today, just little snippets. So we have a little gem here called How to Be Idle by one of my favorite authors. His name is Tom Hodgkinson, and most of the things he writes are in this vein. He actually ran a magazine in the UK in the early 90s called The Idler, and then, you know, when the magazine folded or whatever happened to it, he started writing books. I'm so extra. And this book came out in 2005, and it was very instrumental to me when I quit my job. I think I want to say 2008. I was already not pleased with what was happening, and then I started reading all these anti-labor things. And I was like, you know what? Maybe it isn't my job that sucks. Maybe working is a fucking scam. And of course, it's true. But this was a long time ago. And so, you know, I quit my job, I cashed out my 401k, and then I paid my rent. I prepaid my rent for about 6 months. This was in my mid-20s, and I just fucked off for as long as I possibly could until I couldn't anymore. And it was wonderful. I highly recommend doing that at some point in your life if you can. What's the time? It's 80. It's 80. So the way that he has structured this book, the subtitle is A Loafer's Manifesto, is by the hour of the day, even though the things that he writes about don't necessarily correspond to the hours of the day. They could. So he starts it out at 8 a.m. and ends it at 7 a.m. And every hour of the day he gives it a little theme that he writes about. And one of the things that I wanted to read, one of the chapters that I really wanted to read, even though I'm sure we'll have time for plenty more, was the one where he talks about smoking. And he's not talking about smoking pot, because very few people in the world in this century, or I even guess technically the last, would ever publicly defend in print smoking cigarettes. Which I kind of feel like I have to do now. If I'm going to read it to you, right? I think I'm just going to go get one. I'm going to go get one. I'll be right back, and then I'm going to read you a little essay in defense of smoking. We're all bad influences around here. Alright. Happy stream. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for checking it out. So anyway, without further ado, let's find the chapter on smoking. That's gonna be... He puts that at 8 p.m. chapter was. So let's see, 132. When I first started smoking, at the age of 14, I felt as if I had undergone a kind of rebirth or reawakening. Discovering tobacco was like finding a secret portal, a gateway into a sophisticated garden of worldly pleasures and independent living. Smoking felt good, it looked cool, and it expressed one's urge to rebel against authority, to create one's own path through life, rather than meekly following the pre-approved paths of parents and teachers. Oh, I just got wet. To smoke was to be free. I had also found a friend, a very good friend, possibly a friend for life. To give up would be to suffer a bereavement made doubly worse by the fact that for the rest of my life I would have to endure the sights of others enjoying the company of that lost friend. But we all also know, how could we possibly avoid the fact, so efficient are the healthists, that smoking is bad? And so begins the lifelong struggle between saying yes and saying no. At 14, I resolved to give up when I was 18. At 18, I resolved to give up at 21. At 21, I felt sure I would actively want to give up by the time I reached 30. Now in my mid-30s, I feel certain that by 40, I will have rid myself of this vice. However, for now, I smoke. In fact, I am smoking at this very moment. And when I have finished the sentence, I will read it while blowing smoke at the computer screen. I promise you I did not rehearse that. The inner battle that smoking presents, to give up or not to give up, is mirrored by the civic battle that has been played out ever since tobacco was brought back from the Americas to England by Sir Walter Raleigh in the 16th century. Just a few decades after Raleigh got us hooked on the soothing weed, the moralists started saying no. In 1604, King James I, self-appointed keeper of the public morals, the kind of man who relished torturing witches, published his diatribe against smoking, a counterblast to tobacco. A rare example of good writing coming from the pen of a moralist. Motivated partly by his personal hatred of the libertine ways and cool, easy charm of Sir Walter, his counterblast is a spirited rant that introduces all the great arguments against smoking that are still employed by its detractors today. It's bad for you. It stinks. Your wife hates it. It's selfish, uncivilized, and encourages laziness. For one thing, King James was incensed that we genteel Britons should have lowered ourselves so far as to mimic the habits of the uncouth savage. To James I, smoking was a primitive custom. What honor or policy can move us to imitate the barbarous and beastly manners of the wild, godless, and slavish Indians, especially in so vile and stinking a custom? Why do we not as well imitate them in walking naked as they do, in preferring glasses, feathers, and such toys to gold and precious stones as they do? Yeah, why do we not deny God and adore the devil as they do? He saw tobacco as a revolt against so-called civilized values, property, money worship, and deference to a Christian God. Another argument King James makes against smoking is one I remember being attacked with by teenage non-smokers. That we only smoke because we think it's cool. We cannot be content unless we imitate everything that our fellows do, writes King James, which is rather like our parents saying, and if Johnny jumped off a bridge, would you jump off the bridge as well? To smoke, James I says, is to be irresponsible. It is to abandon one's duty to king and commonwealth. It is, moreover, corrupting to women. The husband shall not be ashamed to reduce thereby his delicate, wholesome, and clean complexioned wife to that extremity, that neither she must also corrupt her sweet breath therewith, or else resolve to live in a perpetual stinking torment. The essay ends with a damning conclusion. A custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and the black stinking fume thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of the pit that is bottomless. Needless to say, King James's counterblast had absolutely no effect whatsoever on the smoking habits of his people. And a year after its publication, he tried for a more direct attack. Tax. Importers were required to cough up, 6 shillings and 8 pence for every pound of tobacco they brought to the country. This double salvo, combining anti-smoking propaganda with punitive tax on the smoker, is a method still in use today by Western governments. In the UK, all tobacco advertising has been banned, and we pay £3.50 per pack to the Treasury in tax. The public health warnings that adorn packets of cigarettes grow more terrifying and dominating every year. After toying around with gentle suggestions such as tobacco seriously damages health, or smoking while pregnant may harm your baby, discreetly placed on the pack, they now require tobacco companies to print the unambiguous legend, "Smoking kills," in giant letters and in a font designed to look as ugly as possible. Will these measures have much effect? One doubts it. In fact, it would be difficult to think of a more effective inducement to smoke to the reckless 14-year-old who is going to live forever. Why did smoking catch on in such a big way, and why at this particular point in history? For the Francophile academic Richard Klein, author of Cigarettes Are Sublime, 1993, there is a simple answer. Tobacco is needed to calm us down, because the passing of the medieval age with its religious certainties was making us anxious. The introduction of tobacco into Europe in the 16th century corresponded with the arrival of the Age of Anxiety, the beginning of modern consciousness that accompanied the invention and universalization of printed books, the discovery of the New World, the development of rational scientific methods, and the concurrent loss of medieval theological reassurances. A mouthful. Which is another way of saying, God felt so sorry for man that he gave us tobacco. The Victorian writer J.M. Barrie, author of the Peter Pan books, takes a more positive view, arguing that the dawn of the Elizabethan age was a sort of year zero for smokers. He wrote a hymn to tobacco called My Lady Nicotine in 1890, a smoking biography where he argued that tobacco woke us up and helped us become great, noble, and wise. Well, shit. And this is the excerpt from that book. So he's quoting the book in the book. You can follow that. The Elizabethan age might be better named the beginning of the smoking era. No unprejudiced person who has given thought to the subject can question the propriety of dividing our history into two periods. The pre-smoking and the smoking. When Raleigh, an owner of whom England should have changed its name, introduced tobacco into this country, the glorious Elizabethan age began. I am aware that those hateful persons called original researchers now maintain that Raleigh was not the man, but to them I turn a deaf ear. I feel that with the introduction of tobacco, England woke up from a long sleep. Suddenly a new zest had been given to life. The glory of existence became a thing to speak of. I think I lost my place there. Men who had hitherto only concerned themselves with the narrow things of home put a pipe into their mouths and became philosophers. Poets and dramatists smoked until all ignoble ideas were driven from them. And in their place rushed such high thoughts as the world had not known before. Petty jealousies no longer held hold of statesmen who smoked and agreed to work together for the public weal. Soldiers and sailors felt, when engaged with a foreign foe, that they were fighting for their pipes. The whole country was stirred by the ambition to live up to tobacco. Everyone, in short, had now a lofty ideal constantly before him. So that was the excerpt from that book that he was quoting, and now it's back to Tom. Now, Tom, back to you, with more cigarettes at 6. The connection between lofty ideals and smoking is, I would argue, the same as the connection between lofty ideals and doing nothing. Smoking is idleness, and it's hard to be lofty when you're toiling and busy. Like angling, smoking transforms the common man into something more heroic, more complete, and it makes a master of a serf. The pipe, wrote William Makepeace Thackeray, draws wisdom from the lips of the philosopher and shuts up the mouths of the foolish. It generates a style of conversation, contemplative, thoughtful, benevolent, and unaffected. My favorite Oriental philosopher, Lin Yutang, was a fan of smoking. In fact, he was heroically irresponsible in this regard, and tells us that he started a magazine called the Analects Fortnightly, in which I consistently tried to disprove the myth of the harmfulness of smoking. Wu-Tang is in agreement with Thackeray on the philosophical benefits of smoking. Smoking, he wrote in 1938, brings about complete spiritual well-being, the condition of keen imaginative perception and full, vibrant creative energy, a condition necessary to our perfect enjoyment of a friend's conversation by the fireside, or to the creating of real warmth in the reading of an ancient book, or to that bringing forth of a perfect cadence of words and thought from the mind that we know as authorship. Aww. Smoking has often been linked to laziness. King James warned the heavy smoker that all his members shall become feeble, his spirits dull, and in the end a drowsy, lazy belly god he shall vanish in a lethargy. But we drowsy, lazy belly gods see the injection of the lethargy as a good thing. In Cigarettes Are Sublime, Richard Klein argues this point in almost poetic terms. The moment of taking a cigarette allows one to open a parenthesis in the time of ordinary experience, a space and time of heightened attention that give rise to a feeling of transcendence, evoked through the ritual of fire, smoke, cinder, connecting hands, lungs, breath, and mouth. It procures a little rush of infinity that alters perspectives, however slightly, and permits, albeit briefly, an ecstatic standing outside of oneself. Phew! So that's what we're doing when we have a fag break, when we ecstatically stand outside the office door. Like fishing, smoking harmonizes activity and inactivity. When smoking, you're not doing nothing, you are smoking. You are both busy and still. This paradox is eloquently expressed by Oscar Wilde in The Importance of Being Earnest. Lady Bracknell, do you smoke? Jack, well, yes, I must admit I smoke. Lady Bracknell, I am glad to hear it. A man should always have an occupation of some kind. Smoking and idleness go hand in hand, partly because it's almost impossible to do physical work, although very possible to think, while smoking. The smoker of cigarettes must always, at each instant, have two hands free, and lips also. He can therefore be neither someone ambitious, nor a worker, nor, with very few exceptions, a poet or an artist. Every task is forbidden him. Even the ineffable pleasure of screwing. So wrote Theodore de Banville, the French critic, and friend to smokers Baudelaire, I can never say that guy's name, and Manet in 1890. The French are much given to contemplation of abstracts, and so it comes as no surprise that they are particularly good at smoking. Every schoolboy with pretensions towards being an intellectual treasures his mind the famous photograph of Albert Camus, looking distinctly Bogart-esque, with his collars turned up, a cigarette between his lips, and an expression of amused detachment on his face. And his fellow existentialist John Paul Sartre, when asked in the 1940s by a magazine to name the most important things in life, answered, I don't know. Everything. Living. Smoking. We might even say that smoking actually brings together being and nothingness. It is while smoking that you can actually be for a moment. But smoking is also a nothing. It has no practical use. It was a Frenchman, too, who came up with the phrase, some kind of French stuff I can't pronounce. Smoking makes you feel alive while it is killing you. In France, the iconography of smoking is intimately bound up with the ideas of freedom and abandon. In France, you have Les Zouaves, cigarette papers which depict the Algerian soldier. You have gypsy images on I'm butchering all of these names, so just bear with me. Galouzet, a sort of Bizet's Carmen type, a dangerous woman. With the exception of Camel, British and American cigarette packets don't feature pictures at all. They rely on typography, and have you also noticed that the cheaper the cigarette, the grander the name? Camel are expensive, Mayfair and Super Kings are cheap. Smoking is an expression of the will. Freedom is also noted by Virginia Nicholson in her study of radical British writers and artists in the early part of the 20th century in Among the Bohemians, in 2002. Tobacco smoking had long been regarded by male bohemians as an activity of primary significance, almost a poetic initiation. Like the smoking of marijuana in later epic, it was celebrated by Théophile Gautier's romantic contemporaries in verse and fiction. Arthur Ransome placed talking, drinking, and smoking together as 3 indispensable pleasures of life, to be enjoyed in the company of half a dozen fellows. It was only natural then that smoking should also be taken up by the feisty females of the era, on the threshold of feminism. But females were not content to be left out of such pleasures, and soon Ransome's male havens were invaded by advanced women brandishing cheroos. Ethel Mannin recalled how flagrant such behavior seemed in those early years. The year would have been 1916 or 1917, not later. The girl, whose name I remember as Monica, gave me a Derish Turkish cigarette from a small packet, and there were 2 young girls, viciously sat, with our pot of tea and our toasted scones, smoking, and in public. This craving for independence was also exploited in the 1920s by the manufacturers of Lucky Strike, who cleverly branded their cigarettes as torches of freedom, in a successful effort to attract female smokers. The idea was repeated in the emancipated 1960s by Virginia Slims, with their "You've come a long way, baby" tagline. Doubtless, the bohemian ladies of leisure enjoyed the aura of devil-may-care louciousness that smoking conferred on them, and back in the 19th century, Baudelaire had observed in his Les Salons de 1848 the same attitude in prostitutes of the Paris bordellos. Prostrate, they display themselves in desperate attitudes of boredom and bar-room indolence with masculine cynicism, smoking cigarettes to kill time with the resignation of Oriental fatalism. This book was written in 2005, but it's quoting lots of other books that were written in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Smoking is shocking, stinky, useless, harmful to the health. No wonder its use is opposed by those unfortunates, epitomized by New York's Mayor Bloomberg, who felt weighed down by a sense of civic responsibility. My New York friend Tom says that there are so many people smoking in the street that you have to go inside for a breath of fresh air. And for Lin Yu Tang, this itself is another advantage of smoking. It annoys the great and the good, the rational, the correct, the proper, and the sensible. And here's his quote. "Much as I like reasonable persons, I hate completely rational beings. For that reason, I am always scared and ill at ease when I enter a house in which there are no ashtrays. The room is apt to be too clean and orderly, and cushions are apt to be in their right places, and the people are apt to be correct and unemotional, and immediately I am put on my best behavior, which means the same thing as the most uncomfortable behavior." Smoking actually does what a great satire is supposed to do. It comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. The good hate it. Liberal commentators still wonder why poor people waste their meager resources on smoking, without realizing that it actually makes life worth living. The oppressed love it. George Orwell, writing of the physical hardships of being down and out in Paris and London, said, "It was tobacco that made everything tolerable." And in Nickel and Dimed, Barbara Ironrack reports that smoking gives a fleeting sense of autonomy to waitresses in grim restaurants. Work is what you do for others. Smoking is what you do for yourself. I don't know why the anti-smoking crusaders have never grasped the element of defiant self-nurturance that makes the habit so endearing to its victims. As if, in the American workplace, the only thing people have to call their own is the tumors they are nourishing and the spare moments they devote to feeding them. And now to an important question. How to smoke? Should true idlers roll their own? Smoke ready-made cigarettes? Or perhaps cigars? Or even the pipe? Let us look to the poets for an answer. Sublime tobacco, which from east to west cheers the tar's labor from the Turkman's rest, which on the Moslem's Ottoman divides his hours and rivals opium and his brides. Magnificent in Stamboul, but less grand, though not less loved in Wapping or on the Strand. Divine in hookahs, glorious in a pipe, when tipped with amber, mellow, rich, and ripe. Like other charmers wooing the caress, more dazzling when staring in full dress. Let thy true lovers more admire by far, thy naked beauties give me a cigar. Thus spake Lord Byron in the Ireland in 1823, who clearly favored the audaciously naked cigar to the demure and clothed pipe. But the problem with cigars nowadays is that they tend to be seen as status symbols rather than instruments of pleasure. A cigar signifies rich, smug capitalist rather than poet, philosopher, monk. As Walt Whitman remarked, a cigar generally has a smoky fire at one end and a conceited spark at the other. For my part, I am a convert to rollies. This is a habit that I am teased for by smokers of ready-mades, who say I should be smoking a proper cigarette to save myself the hassle of rolling one up. Can I just say that when I was reading this book, or maybe slightly before it, I was living in Flagstaff and everyone rolled their own cigarettes there, and they probably still do to this day. But let me get back to the reading. While rolling, you cannot work, and so the rollie extends the pleasure of smoking. They also last longer and go out more frequently. What's more, they provide a more satisfying smoke. Low-tar blends are hypocritical, either smoke or don't. The final glory of the rollie is that by buying tobacco is so much cheaper than buying cigarettes. Before the 1960s, it was the pipe that was the beloved of literary men and reflective types. Its use had all but died out now, but at the turn of the century it appears that everyone was smoking one. In J.M. Barrie's My Lady Nicotine and throughout the works of Jerome K. Jerome, the writers and their buddies were seldom without a pipe. On my desk sits a copy of Pipe and Pouch, the smoker's own book of poetry, published in 1894, which contains 134 poems in praise of smoking. O blessed pipe, that now I clutch within my gripe, what joy is in thy smooth round bowl, as black as coal. Well, I never claimed it was good poetry. I must say I would recommend the pipe to the student of idleness. If you can withstand the ridicule and admonishments of loved ones, then taking up the pipe can be a way of flying back to a lost age of gentlemanly reflection. Pipes require time and leisure. I occasionally smoke one. My girlfriend, Victoria, hates it. When I asked her why, perhaps she did not like the smell, she replied, "No, it's the attitude. I suppose she can't stand to see me idle. She has said I am allowed to smoke it as long as she never has to see me doing it, and as long as I don't send any photographs of me smoking it into the public domain. This is a great shame, as I would have liked to have been smoking a pipe in my author photograph. I think the pipe would have communicated a love of ease and contemplation, but I suppose I ought not threaten domestic harmony. A topic, as it happens, which crops up frequently in the Pipe and Pouch anthology. Many of the poets fret over that old smoker's conundrum, cigar or wife, and generally opt for the cigar, as Rudyard Kipling did. A million surplus Maggies are willing to bear the yoke, and a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke. Another good thing about smoking a pipe is that one does not have to give up smoking cigarettes. Indeed, my arm was of the view cigarettes are for summer, the pipe for the winter. I suppose the ideal would be to have the whole lot in one's household, a pipe and a whole panoply of pipey products, a carton of cigarettes, an ounce of rolling tobacco, and lots of Rizla papers, and a stash of fine cigars for special occasions. I understand that in Victorian times, an item known as a smoking table was a common feature in middle-class homes. It offered all manner of drawers and shelves for storing the various paraphernalia required by the dedicated smoker. We know, of course, about smoking jackets, those dressing gown for the day garments which supposedly had the practical purpose of absorbing the smell of smoke in order that one could retire to one's lady's chamber without offending her delicate nose. The fez, it is said, was designed with the same purpose in mind. Truly, a golden age has passed. Will the moralists win? Anti-tobacconists are the Puritans, controllers, dam builders, people who interfere and against nature, try to redirect man's impulses in a direction contrary to the wishes of nature, of God, we might even say. Smokers, they go with the flow, but they might die early. One of the problems with smoking, it is argued, is the inconvenience it causes to non-smokers. In Victorian days, when we made allowances for smokers, rather than banishing them to the cold, houses had special smoking rooms, where any smokers in the company could retire and pursue their vice without molesting others. Smoking rooms should be brought back to the home and to the office. They should be comfortable, club-like. They should offer books and newspapers, a place to ponder, reflect, and digest. We should buy fezzes and smoking jackets. We should roll our own. In short, we should celebrate our smoking and remove the guilt surrounding it. I think we might paradoxically find that if we did, we would smoke less. Freedom would bring responsibility. So, wasn't that a well-researched and awfully poetic defense of smoking written in the early 2000s? And I hope that you enjoyed that. It brought me a lot of joy when I first read it. I wasn't really quite a hardcore smoker yet, and it might have influenced me. You see, my little underlined passages. All right, let's see. What should we do next? I will read to you the titles of the chapters because the times of day associated with them are immaterial. So we have waking up is hard to do, toil and trouble, sleeping in, skiving for pleasure and profit, the hangover, the death of lunch, on being ill, the nap, time for tea, the ramble, first drink of the day, on fishing, on smoking, the idle home, the pub, riot, the moon and the stars, sex and idleness, the art of conversation, party time, meditation, sleep, holidays, and a waking dream. If any of those called out to you, go ahead and holler. I think, if nobody has any votes, the essay about fishing is really enjoyable. Obviously the pub, I do believe, should be good. The death of lunch? Okay, let's do the death of lunch. Forget what that one's totally about, but I feel like, let's see. Oh yeah, I've got some stuff underlined here. Alright. The hangover definitely keeps me idle. Indeed it does. Alright, let's read the death of lunch, 1 p.m. I have a vague notion that once upon a time, not so long ago, lunch was a meal to be enjoyed. The midday meal was an occasion to be deliberated over, shared with friends and colleagues, savored, taken over 2 or 3 hours. It was a time for gossip, laughter, booze. It was a dreamy oasis of pleasure which took the edge off the dreary afternoon, and was to be looked forward to during the busy morning. It might even involve a stroll around town, a taxi ride, a trip to the gallery. Sometimes lunch would go on all afternoon and into the evening, and leave behind it a delightful trail of cancelled appointments and drudgery postponed. Lunch, wrote the great journalist Keith Waterhouse in his The Theory and Practice of Lunch in 1986, is free will. But what does lunch mean now to the modern worker in the 21st century? In the 21st century West? Sadly, lunch has been reduced to a merely practical affair. The tradition of the leisurely lunch has taken a beating from the new work ethic. Hence the rise of the sandwich as the most efficient means of satisfying hunger with a minimum of fuss. And hence the huge success in the UK of quality sandwich suppliers Pret-a-Manger, who with their French name, perky staff, and piped jazz music pretend to be passionate about food, but are in reality more interested in stuffing the office worker efficiently in order for him or her to return to their desk more quickly. Their real passion, of course, is profit, and to create cash, they have appealed to the culture of the time-starved worker. And in any case, any pretensions towards being passionate about food were surely revealed to be pure bunkum when the chain was bought up by those renowned lovers of quality, McDonald's. We might lay the blame, indeed, at the feet of the busy, restless, striving Americans. Right back in 1882, Nietzsche noted that the lunch was under threat from the new work ethic in the U.S. Quote, "The breathless haste with which they work," he wrote in The Gay Science, "is already beginning to infect old Europe. One thinks with a watch in one's hand, even as one eats one's midday meal while reading the latest news of the stock market. One lives as if one might miss out on something." Oh boy, doesn't that sound familiar? That's my little footnote there. The death of lunch was an event more calamitous to some of us than the death of God. Oh, James just got here. Start over. Observing 1930s New York, Lin Yutang also complained that the speed of life was destroying the pleasure of eating. The tempo of modern life is such that we're given less and less time and thought to the matter of cooking and feeding. It is a pretty crazy life when one eats to work and does not work in order to eat. 1930! This attitude to food, that it is a mere enabler of work, was carried forward by the fascists. Lunch, they believed, was useful if it increased production. Pleasure was not a consideration. The following passage is taken from an Italian factory management manual in 1940. And I quote, "It cannot be a matter of indifference to the industrialist that his own employees should be more or less able to feed themselves appropriately while at the factory. As well as considerations of a humanitarian nature, he should recognize that the function of food is to give the worker's body an injection of energy which will allow him to replenish that consumed by physical and mental effort, and to achieve and maintain as high a point as possible in the production curve, which, as we know, descends quickly when a worker has exhausted his reserves of energy." The sacrifice of food to work reaches its apotheosis in the 1980s. In Oliver Stone's movie Wall Street, thrusting broker Gordon Gekko utters the immortal line, "Lunch? You gotta be kidding. Lunch is for wimps." Lunch meant wasting an hour which could be better spent working. Sociability and pleasure were off the menu. Lunch had been sacrificed to the great gods of work, progress, and beating the other guy. No one has the time to eat at leisure, it seems. It's a common sight to see people snaffling down a burger or sandwich between stops on the underground. This kind of eating has something almost guilty and furtive about it. It's not eating, it's lonely refueling. The same thing happened to breakfast. Handy little bits of solid cereal called breakfast bars advertised themselves with the slogan, "Good food on the go." So much more efficient that way. Today the workers' canteens have been privatized, and in the cities we eat alone. In McDonald's, Burger King, KFC, and the aforementioned Pret-a-Manger. There are the places which today fulfill the fascist definition of the function of food: to give the worker's body an injection of energy. It's a miserable sight, the rows of lone toilers sitting in the windows of these outlets, munching joylessly, reading the paper, or staring blankly onto the street outside. A French philosopher, Jean Baudrillard, writes in America in 1986, comments on his sadness at the sight of another strange modern phenomenon: joggers. And then writes, "The only comparable distress is that of a man eating alone in the heart of the city." Profile is anti-Gogurt. In the UK and in the United States, idlers have witnessed with horror the rise of the Starbucks-style coffee shop, which is where many of us grab a lunchtime sandwich these days. The coffee shops of the 21st century have little or nothing in common with the coffee shops of the 18th century, which were loafing centers par excellence, serving vast bowls of alcoholic punch and existing to facilitate convivial exchanges. Convivial. The modern Costas and Starbucks have as their secret mission purely useful goals: give you strong coffee and some bread to help you survive the day in a state of high anxiety and fear. They give off an unpleasant aroma of efficiency. Hitting British shores in 1996, the first wave of coffee shops was led by the Seattle Coffee Company. At first, the notion seemed tempting: squashy sofas, good coffee, soft lighting, yummy munchies. Admittedly, it was our own fault. The British cafe had never really got it right. What with its scorched instant coffee, cold toast, surly service, neon strip lighting, orange tables bolted to the floor, grime and charmlessness. So there was a gap in the market, no doubt. I remember being quite enthusiastic about them when writing an article in Face magazine explaining the difference between a skinny latte and a double chocolate mocha. I'm a consumer. The new coffee shops had a West Coast chic about them. They faintly reminded one of the beatnik San Francisco establishment. They looked like loafing zones, somewhere you could hang out, smoke, feel like a French intellectual. Could they be a gift to the non-employed? I'm the only mod. But the cozy and entrepreneurial Seattle Coffee Company was wiped out when the vast Starbucks outfit bought all 65 of them in 1998. And these days, every high street has its Costa, Starbucks, Aroma, or Nero. Remember, this guy's in Britain. Far from being loafing zones, these places are simply pit stops for working machines, petrol stations for human beings. As the writer Ian Sinclair puts it, the whole culture has speeded up so that people just queue to get takeaways. And it's the death of cafes. Who's going to spend days hanging out at cafes? It's gone. And what's the result of all this coffee drinking? We're all wired. The UK is beginning to resemble the USA, where drinking alcohol has been replaced by drinking coffee. So instead of being half cut all afternoon, as in the days of the 3-martini lunch, businessmen are wound up on caffeine, perspiring, worrying, rushing, shouting out junior staff, and developing ulcers. I'm certain that we will soon discover the appalling effect of this coffee frenzy on the nation's physical and mental health. Truly, the coffee culture is inimical to the idler. But not so long ago, in London and in New York City, those two poles of the work ethic, the leisurely lunch, thrived. New York is the greatest city in the world for lunch. That's the gregarious time, wrote the humorist William Emerson Jr. in the 1975 Newsweek. These lunches were seriously booze-soaked, too. The President Gerald Ford in 1978 speech said, "The 3-martini lunch is the epitome of American efficiency. Where else can you get an earful, a bellyful, and a snootful at the same time? And why has such wit and light humor disappeared from presidential discourse?" Now, if you've ever had 3 martinis, you'll know that the effect is powerful. They are so strong that you practically inhale them. They make only the briefest contact with your stomach before entering the head. We'll return to the subject in our first drink of the day chapter. I'm having a little gin. 3 over lunch must have led to the sight of some delightfully tipsy, not to mention big-haired and kipper-tied statesmen and businessmen reeling into taxis on Park Avenue at 4 p.m. Before going back to work to the wood-paneled office to loosen their tie, put their feet on the desk, and give the staff the rest of the day off. The 1970s was also a golden era for lunch in London. The journalist and writer Keith Waterhouse was a master of the art of lunch, and even wrote a wonderful book about it, The Theory and Practice of Lunch, published in 1986 when lunch had not quite degenerated into a mere stomach-filling exercise. In it, Waterhouse provided a lengthy definition of what lunch meant to him, and crucially, its pure use factor was not among his criteria. And quote, "It is not a meal partaken of, however congenial the company, with the principal object of nourishment. It is not when either party is on a diet, on the wagon, or in a hurry. Lunch," said Waterhouse, "is a midday meal taken at leisure by ideally 2 people, ideally 2 people. It is essential that lunch companions are drawn together by some motivation beyond the pangs of hunger or the needs of commerce." James is making me crack up. "A little light business may be touched, but the occasion is firmly social." Happily, the culture of the long business lunch thrives in some European countries. A couple of years ago, I was in France on business to meet a firm of distillers. They were manufacturing a new brand of absinthe that my company had named and branded. About 8 of us enjoyed a 3-course meal with snails, wine, and absolutely no business discussed whatsoever. Just a lot of laughter. As the lunch went on, I started to get fidgety. Surely we should all get back to their office and conclude our business. After all, we had to catch the Eurostar. But on voicing my anxieties, my desire to work was roundly dismissed by the French distillers. They laughed, arguing that there was no hurry. Things would happen all in good time, and they justified themselves with the following paradox. Some kind of French thing I can't pronounce. The less you work, the more you produce. They were right, of course. The half hour which we had left to do our work was plenty. If we had allowed ourselves an hour and a half, then that is how long the job would have taken. Work expands to fit the time provided. Anyway, this superb aphorism stuck in my mind. I might add that the whole incident was rather embarrassing for me, and that the editor of The Idler had been out-idled by some provincial businessman. But mutter, some kind of French phrase, when you stumble back into the office at 3:30 and your boss upbraids you for your slacking and you are unlikely to get much sympathy. There is hope for the Brits, and it comes in the form of the international movement for the defense of and the right to pleasure, more commonly known as slow food. Founded in 1986 by a group of left-wing Italians who were appalled by the cultural ascendancy of fast food, Slow Food's plan is to bring pleasure, quality, variety, and humanity back to the production and to the eating of food. They do this by running events and tastings, by producing books and a superb magazine. From humble beginnings, it is now spread all over Europe with nearly 100,000 members. It has even recently opened an office in the US, the birthplace of fast food. Their logo is the snail. The founder, Carlo Petrini, sees the movement as a fully fledged cultural revolution, and I agree. As the Slow Food Manifesto demonstrates, their philosophy reaches well beyond food and can be seen as a protest against the dehumanizing mechanization of life. And I quote, "Our century, which began and has developed under the insignia of industrial civilization, first invented the machine and then took it as its life model. We are enslaved by speed and have all succumbed to the same insidious virus. Fast life, which disrupts our habits, pervades the privacy of our homes, and forces us to eat fast food. To be worthy of the name, Homo sapiens should rid himself of speed before it reduces him to a species in danger of extinction. A firm defense of quiet material pleasure is the only way to oppose the universal folly of fast life. May suitable doses of guaranteed sensual pleasure and slow, long-lasting enjoyment preserve us from the contagion of the multitude who mistake frenzy for efficiency. Our defense should begin at the table with slow food. Let us rediscover the flavors and savors of regional cooking and banish the degrading effects of fast food. In the name of productivity, fast life has changed our way of being and threatens our environment and our landscapes. So slow food is now the only truly progressive answer. That is what real culture is about, developing taste rather than demeaning it. And what better way to set about this than an international exchange of experiences, knowledge, and projects? Slow food guarantees a better future." Unquote. Back to Tom. The British and the Americans are ripe for a slow food invasion. Long enough have we put up with food made by robots. The huge success of Eric Schlossler's book Fast Food Nation in 2001, which describes the inhumane processes by which modern hamburger, chicken, and French fry products are manufactured, and by the way, revealing some of the appalling conditions and low wages suffered by the unskilled labor force which produces this stuff, is surely a positive sign. Perhaps we are waking up. We need more lunches like the following, described in An Angler at Large, written by William Kane in 1911, when the pace of life was a little slower. He describes the pleasures of a picnic lunch taken on the riverbank, and I quote, "One eats with no sense of time loss. one's enjoyment of food, a very proper enjoyment, is not marred by any anxiety about the river. One lingers over the cigarette that follows and the cigarette that follows that. One does not hurry. There are no fish anywhere at all. One dismisses fish from one's mind and takes one's pleasure in mastication, like a wise man. A wise man. We need to claim lunch back. It is our natural right. It has been stolen from us by our rulers. The fear that keeps you chained to your desk, staring at your screen, does not serve your spirit. Lunch is a time to forget about being sensible, practical, efficient. A proper lunch should be spiritually as well as physically nourishing. Cozy, convivial, a treat. Lunch is for loafers. Also, James, when I was in England, all the food that I had there was really, really good. So I'm sure it's bad in some places, but that has not been my experience. But eating in Europe was very different. You know, they don't rush you out. They don't have to churn the tables the way they do here because, you know, in Europe they get paid a living wage. You don't have to tip them. And they'll let you sit there for 8 hours doing nothing. They don't care. It rules. Oh yeah. This oh my god, this book like turned my brain inside out when I first read it, and then I immediately was like, that's it. I'm living like this from now on. That's it. End of story. And for the most part I did. I'm a little more business oriented now than I used to be, but I still eat very slowly, smoke very slowly. Perhaps I drink a little too quickly, but so let's see. It is about 9 o'clock, and these essays are quite long. I only read 2 of them in the hour. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I think I'm just gonna call it for the evening. I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed reading it, even though I know that my intonation was slowly creeping up at certain points. I was trying to keep it, you know, with my smooth jazz radio announcer channel voice on, but I don't think that it did a super great job of that. I need to learn how to rein it in a little bit sometime. But that was super fun for me to do, and I hope to keep doing it a bit more if you guys are interested in hearing it. I have lots and lots of books. I'm kind of a big deal. I own many leather-bound books. I'm kind of a big deal. But we will be playing Jackbox this Saturday night at 8 o'clock. 8 to 11 p.m. New York time, and that'll be Party Time USA. Totally different vibe from what you have just witnessed here. But on that note, I will see you on Saturday. Feel free to join the Discord. It is a fun time over there. And I will talk to you all very soon.